I was sitting in a co-working space yesterday with a colleague of mine, and he is the absolute definition of hustle culture.
Oh, I think I know the type.
You totally know the type. Smartwatch, buzzing every 30 seconds, talking at like 2x speed, juggling 3 different deadlines while he's checking stocks on his phone. He's always the guy preaching about optimization, how to squeeze more efficiency out of every single minute.
Right.
And so I'm watching him, and he's frantically finishing an email. His leg is bouncing with that nervous, caffeine-fueled energy that I feel like everyone has these days.
Yeah, that's clear.
And I fully expected him to just jump up, rush to a meeting, maybe lecture me on some new productivity app. But then the scene it took this really weird turn.
Okay.
He snaps his laptop shut, takes this really deep breath, and reaches into his bag. And he doesn't pull out a tablet or a planner or anything like that. He pulls out a wooden embroidery hoop and a needle.
Wow. Okay, that's not what I was expecting.
Okay, not at all. And the shift was almost jarring. As soon as he started pushing the thread through the fabric, just that slow, repetitive motion, his whole demeanor changed. The legs stopped bouncing. The tension in his shoulders just dropped away. He went from a state of total digital panic to complete stillness in seconds. It seemed like such a contradiction, you know? A guy who measures his life in nanoseconds is suddenly content to move at the speed of a single stitch.
Yeah.
So I asked him about it, and he didn't talk about the art or the design or anything. He just said, my hands need to know they can still make something real.
That's a really powerful observation.
It made me realize that for him, and probably for a lot of us, this wasn't just a hobby. It was a survival mechanism against all the chaos.
It absolutely is. And, when you saw that immediate switch from digital chaos to this tactile stillness, that cuts right to the heart of what we're going to explore. It shows that slow craft is, it's way more than just a niche trend or something you do in your spare time.
It's a counterpoint.
It's a necessary counterpoint to the relentless speed of modern life.
Yeah.
It's an act of internal resistance, really.
Right.
So for this deep dive, our mission is to look at this whole global thing we call the slow movement, and specifically slow craft, and to analyze it not just as a cultural whim, but as a critical survival mechanism. And it seems to operate across 3 interconnected spheres.
Okay, so what are the 3 spheres?
First, we're going to unpack the science behind that mental shift you just described. Then we'll analyze how it's sparking, basically an economic revolution against systems like fast fashion. And finally, we'll look at how it's actively rebuilding social bonds that have been, frayed by all this digital isolation.
Okay, let's unpack that. I want to start with the most immediate impact. What is actually happening inside our brains when that thread goes through the fabric? We really need to get into the neurobiology of it all.
Yeah, let's do that. Because when you look at the research around these repetitive, slow activities, things like crochet, knitting, even pottery, the findings are pretty dramatic.
In what way?
Well, researchers have been investigating the clinical efficacy, the neurobiological mechanisms at play, and what they're finding is that these activities provide measurable mental health benefits. Benefits that can rival established practices like meditation or mindfulness.
Now, that's a bold claim. We always hear about mindfulness, where the goal is often, no thought or focused breathing. But with crafting, your mind is very actively engaged in a task. How does the science bridge that gap?
That's a great question. And the difference, I think, lies in what some psychologists call productive distraction. The benefits you see, the reduction in stress, anxiety, symptoms of depression, they come from a couple of key mechanisms.
Okay.
So first, there's the motor engagement, the repetition that's just built into these crafts, that constant, predictable movement of yarn or clay. It activates what's known as the parasympathetic nervous system.
So that's the opposite of the fight or flight response, right? It's the system that tells your body to rest and digest.
Exactly. When your body is focused on that smooth, predictable rhythm of a stitch, it's sending a signal to the brain that the environment is safe, it's calm. And that physiological response gets an extra boost from the release of serotonin.
Oh, okay, the mood stabilizer.
The natural antidepressant. It's not just, a cognitive preference for doing something quiet. It's a deep, involuntary physiological reaction. It's the tactile sensory input, the rhythm your hands establish, the focus on the texture of the materials, the sequence of the stitch. It all grounds the mind in the present moment, a lot like deep breathing does. But you get the added bonus of a tangible output.
That really moves the whole conversation beyond just, oh, this is relaxing, and into the realm of, well, basically chemical therapy. Do we have any data on how effective this actually is, say, for depression?
We do. We have substantial data, actually. There was one really extensive study, over 3,500 people who knit. They were looking at the clinical efficacy of yarn crafts, and the results were just astounding. So 81% of the respondents who self-reported having depression also said they felt happy after knitting.
81%! That's huge!
It is. And even more compelling, more than half of that group, so over 50%, reported feeling very happy.
Wow.
This suggests that the activity provides an immediate, substantial lift in mood, and one that can last long after you put the needles down. It acts as a kind of sustained countermeasure to that internal chatter that drives so much stress.
And I can see how having that structured space for your mind to settle down would be incredibly useful, especially for people dealing with intense internal struggles, intrusive thoughts.
That's precisely the key for anxiety and focus. Crafting forces your hands to stay busy, and that productively anchors the mind. It just makes it harder for those intrusive or repetitive thoughts to take hold, gives you a focused, positive outlet. And we see evidence of this helping with everything from, simple social anxiety in a group setting all the way to more complex conditions.
What kind of conditions specifically? Where does this structured focus seem to be the most beneficial?
The research really highlights its effectiveness for anxiety that's associated with conditions like obsessive-compulsive disorder, OCD, and also eating disorders, particularly anorexia. There was a study that focused on women coping with anorexia, and nearly 3/4 of them found that the act of knitting was specifically calming and anxiety-reducing for them.
So it's like replacing a negative pattern with a positive one.
Yes. It serves as a focused, positive, repetitive task that an individual can consciously choose to replace those negative, often destructive, repetitive thought patterns. It restores a sense of control, a sense of usefulness, through the simple act of deliberate creation.
Thinking about control and creation, it seems like a natural next step to think about long-term benefits. Does doing this sort of slow craft regularly, does it actually help protect the brain as we get older?
It really seems to. The thinking is that it helps build resilience. Yarn crafting and similar slow crafts are now considered to be neuroprotective.
Okay, what does that mean exactly?
There was a landmark study led by Dr. Jonas Geda at the Mayo Clinic that looked at adults between the ages of 70 and 89. And they found that engaging the mind through stimulating activities like reading books, playing games, or significantly crafting resulted in a remarkable 30 to 50% decreased risk of developing mild cognitive impairment.
30 to 50%. That's not a marginal effect. That's a massive protective effect. But if reading and games are also on that list, how do researchers sort of isolate the specific benefit of the craft itself?
That is an excellent, critical question. And the hypothesis is that the unique value of crafting lies in its combination of physical dexterity and mental planning.
Ah, okay.
So unlike just reading, crafting requires detailed spatial reasoning. It requires memory for patterns, problem solving, and continuous fine motor coordination. This dynamic engagement is thought to promote the development of new neural pathways, what they call building cognitive reserve.
Cognitive reserve.
Exactly. Think of it with the analogy of the brain's bank. Mentally stimulating activities are like making deposits. And the more complex the activity, the larger the deposit. Crafting demands both halves of the brain to work at the same time. You've got the logical planning of the pattern and the motor execution of the stitch.
Right. Left brain, right brain.
This cross-wiring helps the brain build a really robust buffer that can potentially postpone or even reduce age-related memory loss and dementia. It's all about promoting neuronal health and plasticity.
It makes sense. Activities that demand that high dexterity and pattern recognition would absolutely keep those neural circuits firing optimally. And this isn't just for, private benefit. The research shows these therapeutic practices are being integrated into group counseling settings.
Absolutely. Crochet therapy, for instance, is actively being incorporated into counseling, especially in community and group settings. They often use a very familiar social model, something like a coffee clutch or book club, to structure the time.
So it's less intimidating.
Exactly. That informal structure creates this low-threat, friendly atmosphere for people to gather and talk about challenging personal issues. It just normalizes the therapeutic process.
Right.
And this is particularly effective for elderly and disabled populations who might be dealing with acute issues of loneliness or depression, or feelings of uselessness that come from reduced mobility or social contact.
And the output, right. The finished product must contribute immensely to that goal of building self-esteem. because the individual is moving from feeling useless to feeling productive and purposeful.
Precisely. Crafting inherently results in a beautiful, self-expressed product. And this output provides a really crucial sense of purpose, especially when it's directed toward charitable giving.
Right.
For example, participants often donate chemo caps for cancer patients, or they create these little levees for preemies in the neonatal intensive care unit. This altruistic application transforms the activity from just self-help into meaningful community contribution.
I found the application of superhero levees particularly moving. It really grounds that abstract concept of self-worth into a tangible object that helps someone else through their trauma.
It's such a powerful example of therapeutic utility. These superhero levees are often given to child victims of, say, abuse or a fire. And the crafted object gives them a secure, comforting thing to hold during really stressful situations like court appearances or police interviews.
Wow.
It's an external symbol of care and safety, and it was created through a process that simultaneously provided internal safety and purpose to the maker. So the maker's own trauma or difficulty is channeled into an act of creation that helps soothe the distress of another person. It's a profound connection.
That is a profound connection between creation and coping. There's also a really unexpected cognitive benefit that was noted in the sources, something to do with basic literacy.
Yes, quite unexpectedly, especially for individuals who had previously low levels of reading and comprehension. The structured process of working through a basic crochet pattern, where you have to know that CC means single crochet and C means chain, and the numbers dictate the sequence.
It's like learning a code.
It's like learning a code. It requires the participant to decipher and follow sequential logic and specialized vocabulary. And for some participants, this consistent practice in pattern comprehension led to a marked improvement in their overall reading and comprehension skills. The brain learns how to follow instructions and extract meaning from symbolic text, and those are skills that translate directly to written language.
Fascinating.
And what's really fascinating here is how this simple physical act of creating stability and resilience in the individual mind, this deep neurological survival mechanism, connects directly to challenging the instability and, frankly, the dehumanizing pace of our wider consumption culture. The internal decision to slow down immediately has external economic consequences.
And here's where we make that pivot, right? From the deeply personal to the massively global. Because this impulse towards slow craft, it feels like the direct, modern-day answer to a moral and economic problem that was first identified way back at the start of the Industrial Revolution.
Industrial exploitation.
Exactly. Now perfected and scaled globally in the garment industry. It's this battle of speed versus morality, and its roots are really, really deep.
Yeah, we're talking about the British arts and crafts movement of the late 19th century. Industrialization fundamentally ripped the worker away from the means of production. It turned skilled artisans who understood the entire creative process into what critics at the time famously described as mechanical in head and heart.
That's such a key distinction. The problem wasn't just, low wages, it was alienation. When the worker only performs one tiny step over and over, they lose any connection to the meaning of the final product.
That's it exactly. And you have to look at the moral and philosophical critique that was established by figures like John Ruskin and Augustus Pugin. Ruskin was adamant that the industrial division of labor was, in his words, dishonest, because it denied the worker any creative contribution.
And he had that idea about the finish of the product, right?
He did. He argued that the smooth, impersonal surface of an industrial product actually degraded the worker, while a rougher finish, one that showed the maker's hand, was a signal of a happily engaged worker. They were drawing a direct moral line between the condition of labor and the quality of the product.
And then William Morris comes along.
William Morris, yeah. He was heavily influenced by this critique and also by Karl Marx's theories of capitalist alienation, this idea that the worker is estranged from the product, from the process. So he founded Morris, Marshall, Faulkner and Company, and he sought to reintroduce the aesthetic dimension right back into the labor process itself.
Morris's vision was truly radical for the time. His goal was work that was worth doing and be of itself pleasant to do. And it had to be performed under circumstances that were neither over-wearisome nor over-anxious. I mean, how did he even attempt to put that ideal into practice?
He tried to provide a healthy, stimulating working environment in his workshop. He focused on skilled craftsmanship, on small-scale production, not just mass output. His vision was a direct response to the dehumanizing factory floor, and it was a political attempt to realize more equitable relations of production, where the worker could feel pride in the whole creation, not just a tiny part of it.
But of course, the high cost of that skilled labor meant the beautiful products of the arts and crafts movement were, well, they were largely inaccessible to the very working class it was designed to uplift.
A tragic irony.
And now, fast forward a century or so, and the contemporary garment industry represents what the sources call a veritable zenith of the very problems Morris was struggling against. Only now it's operating on a globally massive scale.
And the problem of industrial exploitation has become infinitely more complex because of globalization. Historically, the unpredictability of clothing trends, it pushed all the financial risk down the production chain to subcontractors. And that's what created the sweatshop system, which is defined by physical isolation, a total lack of oversight, and relentless worker exploitation.
And globalization just took that model, exported it, and scaled it up exponentially. It exploited international trade agreements just to maximize profit. Let's make sure we're clear on the mechanisms that really drove this.
Okay, so critically, outsourcing was accelerated by agreements like NAFTA, the North American Free Trade Agreement. These agreements allowed capital to move around so much more easily. And when a company can move its manufacturing base across borders that rapidly, it creates these incredibly complex global supply chains where that mobility exerts immense pressure on vulnerable workers.
This creates what sociologists call hegemonic despotism.
Right. And despotism implies total control. But hegemonic means that dominance is maintained by consent, or really by fear. Workers accept poor conditions because the threat of the company just packing up and leaving, the threat of capital flight, is constant.
So the fear of being fired is replaced by the much bigger fear of the whole plant closing down.
Exactly. Total economic collapse for the region. It's a very subtle yet powerful form of what's been called rational tyranny.
And the system that defines the modern garment industry is fast fashion, which uses quick response management, or QR management. We should be really clear about what that actually is.
QR management is the supply chain strategy that prioritizes flexibility and speed, what they call product velocity, above everything else. It relies on instantaneous consumer feedback to adjust production in real time. We're talking about moving a garment from a design sketch to a store shelf in a matter of weeks.
And that kind of speed.
That rapid-fire speed and volume, it necessitates that factory risk transfer. It means there's virtually no consideration for the workers involved or for the environment. The whole system is designed to maximize quantity and turnover, treating clothing as if it's disposable.
And the cost metrics of this disposable system are they're devastating. It relies on cheap synthetic materials, mostly polyester, which comes from petroleum. It guzzles water and energy, and it contributes massively to global textile waste in landfills.
It is inherently unsustainable, both socially and ecologically. And tragically, the grim social reality was just laid bare for the whole world to see with the horrific collapse of Rana Plaza in Bangladesh in 2013. Over 1,100 people were killed. That event became this indelible icon of the unacceptable working conditions that are required to maintain the speed and low cost of fast fashion.
So if that's the problem, the solution has to be a radical departure, a deliberate act of slowing down and reintroducing some kind of moral clarity into the supply chain. And that's where the slow fashion movement comes in.
Yes. Slow fashion, which is championed by critics like Kate Fletcher and Linda Gross, is described as a blatant discontinuity. It's a fundamentally different starting point. It just rejects that growth-based disposable model entirely.
So what does that vocabulary look like when you translate it into actual production principles? What are they doing differently?
Well, it involves small-scale production. It means prioritizing traditional craft techniques, using local materials, and serving local markets. But maybe the most significant economic challenge it poses is the goal to price garments to reflect their true costs.
Okay, that's crucial. What does true cost mean here?
It means that slow fashion manufacturers consciously include the costs that fast fashion brands routinely defer. Things like environmental impact, fair wages, and economic stability for workers. A high-quality, ethically made garment is just, plain and simple, expensive to produce.
So let's see how that theory translates into what the sources call industrial intervention. We can look at the case studies of those two Canadian companies, Bettina Lou and Atelier B. They're both Montreal-based, and they're consciously operating against the grain of these global supply chains.
Yeah, both of these companies really exemplify that localized, small-scale production ideal, and they prove that it's commercially viable, even if it's on a very different scale.
How different a scale are we talking?
Well, consider the stark contrast. Mass production runs are typically in the thousands, sometimes tens of thousands of pieces. For Tina Lou, their production runs range from 50 to 300 pieces, and for Atelier B, it's even smaller, often only 10 to 120 pieces per design.
That is an extraordinarily small scale, and that accommodates two key intertwined issues. First, the ethical concerns. There's minimal resource waste because they're only producing what they know they can sell. And second, the practical financial concerns for a small company. It dramatically reduces their financial risk if a specific style doesn't sell quickly. They can be nimble, but they're deliberately slow.
And their commitment to quality over speed is fundamental to their entire ethos. The founders, they intentionally avoid the constant pressure of fast fashion trends. They prioritize timeless garments that are designed to last for years, which dramatically lowers the cost per wear for the consumer.
Which is a totally different way of thinking about value.
It is. And importantly, they link their ethical stance directly back to William Morris. They operate at a pace where the core team can be, in their words, laughing and talking and having fun, consciously avoiding the stress and anxiety that defines QR management and the sweatshop model.
That personal goal to make the work pleasant, that is a direct, conscious realization of Morris's 19th century socialist aspiration. And you can actually see that commitment baked right into the product details. It's like a subtle but potent signal to the consumer about the value proposition.
High quality just requires more time and more skill, and that's reflected in the price.
Yeah.
We should probably define one of those quality metrics, stitches per inch, or SPI.
Okay.
High SPI signals superior quality. It means the seam is stronger, the garment will hold its shape better, and the finished product will have a more fluid drape. But achieving a high SPI takes more time and more skill from the operator, which increases the cost. These companies are committed to that higher standard.
And we have some really specific, almost microscopic examples here. If you look at the construction of the Bettina Lou Cecile shirt, beyond the natural fibers, the details are meticulous. Color-matched buttons, tone-on-tone darting for a better drape, concealed stitching on the back facing. These are all signs of considered slow production where cost is secondary to longevity.
And the details of the Atelier B 1906W dress, they highlight these little touches that are often apparent only to the wearer. And that's what fosters that personal connection. They focus on internal finishing details. Carefully finished linings, concealed label stitching, making sure the fabric direction is uniform throughout the entire garment, internal facings. These are all details that show a deep respect for the fabric and for the structural integrity of the piece.
And if a garment is made to last for years with internal details that inspire that kind of personal connection, it completely transforms the consumer's relationship to it. It becomes the opposite of an anonymous, mass-produced item that's meant to be worn 5 times and then just thrown away.
Crucially, this ethical focus extends to their labor relations. It directly reverses that historical division of responsibility that fostered the sweatshop system in the first place. The founders of both Bettina Lou and Atelier B, they insist on personally vetting their local Montreal-based contractors. They make sure the working conditions are pleasant, and they pay fair wages. They'll sometimes accept higher rates than what was originally proposed because they recognize the level of skill and time involved.
Which is a direct reversal of that historical trend of constantly driving labor costs down.
A total reversal. They're working collaboratively with their contractors, not despotically controlling them. The economic choice that these slow fashion companies are making is, at its core, an ethical one. And that ethical relationship extends beyond the factory floor. It fundamentally changes the fabric of the community itself by prioritizing collaboration over ruthless competition.
So the impulse to slow down, to engage in this careful, deliberate labor, it doesn't just heal the mind and challenge global capitalism. It seems to actively repair the social infrastructure that modern life has really broken down. I mean, we've prioritized autonomy over collaboration, passive screen culture over active engagement, and it's led to this widespread social isolation.
And that's the third critical function of slow craft, fostering social cohesion. Think back to those crochet therapy groups we talked about in the beginning. Operating in that informal coffee clutch model, they naturally build emotional bonds and social networks that go way beyond the structured activity itself.
Right, which is vital, because that social connection then helps combat the depression, the loneliness, the feelings of uselessness, not just during the formal group session, but outside of it too. It builds a sense of belonging and mutual purpose.
And that shift is happening in retail too. It's building social bridges between consumers and producers. The hybrid workshop model that companies like Bettina Liu and Atelier B use, where the retail space blends directly with the prototyping and production facilities, that is a very deliberate structural choice.
So it's intentionally blurring the boundary between production and consumption, which traditionally were separated by walls and oceans, often to hide the conditions of labor.
And that transparency is absolutely key. It provides customers with the information they need to distinguish quality and value. And often, customers provide direct input that actually affects future production.
That's interesting.
Historically, technical illustrations were seen as diminishing craft knowledge by making it public and easily replicable, which disempowered the artisan. Now, these slow companies intentionally put their methods on display to convey their core value, that practical knowledge and skill are retained and still valuable because, despite the transparency, the skill exists only in practice.
You can see how it's done, but only the skilled artisan can actually do it.
Precisely. And this transparent local approach is also a powerful survival mechanism for the entire local economy, particularly for skilled labor. The producers recognize they're less in competition with each other and more in collaboration.
How does that play out?
Well, producers in specialized centers like Montreal, they realize they have to share resources and knowledge to ensure the local industry survives, and that their pool of skilled contractors remains employed. They depend on a limited, highly skilled local labor force, so maintaining that robust ecosystem is in their collective best interest. It's a dramatic shift away from the cutthroat outsourcing model.
And we can see this principle of cultural and economic interdependence even more clearly in more traditional, non-Western contexts. The case of Muna weaving in Indonesia is a compelling example of this. It's a place where social capital is the literal foundation of the industry.
The Muna weaving community is a perfect illustration of how social bonds preserve a craft through generations. These traditional weaving skills, they're not learned in a school. It's informal, inherited knowledge passed down from parents and grandmothers. Kids often start participating when they're as young as 10 years old. This practice embodies what they call local wisdom, which contains life policies like cooperation, mutual trust, and a really strong work ethic.
So the process of acquiring the skill is totally intertwined with the social structure of the family and the community. It's not just a technical lesson, it's a moral one.
It absolutely is. And while the core knowledge is inherited, they're also proactive about modernization. The skills are deepened through non-formal training, like motif design training that's provided by the local Department of Trade and Industry.
So they're blending the old and the new.
A blend of inherited technique and formalized, government-supported innovation. It ensures the craft stays artistically relevant and economically viable. And experience is paramount. Weavers with 50 or more years of experience, they are forged into these reliable artisans whose dedication maintains the cultural reproduction of the craft itself.
And they've managed to integrate technological innovation like the hand loom without losing the essence of the craft, which is always the challenge when speed enters the equation.
They've achieved a really crucial balance. While traditional tools still exist for certain types of weaves, adopting the hand loom, a technological innovation, has significantly increased both productivity and quality.
By how much?
Weavers using hand looms can produce maybe 20 to 25 pieces a month, compared to only 8 or 9 using older, more labor-intensive methods. This innovation makes the craft competitive in the modern market, while at the same time maintaining high quality. The resulting fabric is described as more subtle and refined, and it preserves that human connection to the material.
Now, the role of social capital trust, norms, networks, you said that's the central pillar of the Muna economy. It sounds like it governs their business relationships entirely, almost replacing formal contracts.
Trust is paramount in their economic framework. The weavers rely heavily on consumer confidence about the quality and timeliness of their products. But critically, they also rely on mutual trust with itinerant merchants who act as their primary distribution network.
And these merchants often pay the weavers later after the goods have been sold in distant markets.
That's right. And that system only works because of the exceptionally strong social capital, the high work ethos and mutual cooperation that are enforced by community norms. If a weaver fails to deliver quality or a merchant fails to pay, the entire community suffers a loss of confidence.
So the whole system is built on reputation.
This collective adherence to strong social norms is the ultimate economic foundation. It demonstrates that community health and trust are powerful economic currencies. And that's a lesson the fast fashion system has completely forgotten.
So when you bring these three spheres together, the neurological, the economic, and the communal, What stands out is how the ideals charted by William Morris over a century ago are actually being realized today.
Exactly. The belief that art should inform labor, that work should be pleasant, that the beauty of the earth shouldn't wither under the pursuit of profit. That's finding traction, not just among everyday individuals who are looking for a mental reprieve, but among small manufacturers who are staking their entire survival on these very values.
It's clear this isn't just some passing trend. It's a systemic resistance. The simple act of making, whether it's for profit, for your community, or just for your own sanity, is a radical political and aesthetic act. The textile industry was the engine that powered the Industrial Revolution. It led the world into this relentless race toward efficiency and ever-increasing scale.
But now, the choice to slow down, to engage in craftsmanship that foregrounds ethics and quality, it challenges the established boundary between craft and industry. It really recalls Morris's radical thought that these seemingly opposite entities, the past and the present, the political and the aesthetic, can actually coalesce. And this creates what's been called an essential restlessness, a defiance against being paralyzed by the antinomy of speed versus slowness.
And companies like Atelier B and Bettina Liu, with their small production runs and their insistence on fair, localized working conditions, and then just individuals finding peace with the needle and thread, they are all demonstrating that the presumed linear path forward for conventional industrial progress is, well, it's actually pretty unclear. They're realizing the core aspiration of the arts and crafts movement, rebelling against the turning of men into machines.
The trajectory of the Industrial Revolution may not have been permanently blocked, but it has certainly been interrupted. We've seen how the consumer has real power to support this movement, not just through, antagonism against fast fashion giants, but through neighborly support for those local producers who consciously choose to price their garments to reflect the true cost of ethical labor and environmental care.
That's the new viability of slow craft.
It is. It's an ethical system that benefits both the producer's mind and the global community.
Thank you for joining us for this deep dive into the survival mechanism of slow craft. We hope you gained some insights worth keeping.